to grow plants, trees that are more attainable and not something that will get up to 20 feet tall and you can't even reach your fruit, especially without being on a ladder. Temperature limitations, especially here in the foothills, and then what growing requirements that these trees need, the soils and the light, the drainage, and anything else. Tracy? So in the light of that, one of the things that I like to first talk about is the rootstock. And your rootstock is what the variety that you want the scion to be grafted to. So you'll notice that graft bud, they talk about it as being like the hind leg of a dog. And that's your rootstock is at the bottom, and then your scion, the variety you want, is grafted onto that. And that way you get different characteristics because the rootstock will give you some enhancements to your variety that the variety itself does not have. Next. So why would you want to have a rootstock that's dwarf? Well, one of the biggest reasons, again, is even if it's a dwarf tree, it can get to 10 feet tall. And we would prefer that you keep it down lower because that would still necessitate you getting on a ladder. It has plenty of a fruiting area. You can put it in a container easily. And in fact, I have a neighbor that has a tree in a pot just about the same size as this lemon is in. And year after year, they've gotten 50 to 60 lemons off of that one small tree. So dwarf rootstock assists with all things size control, less pruning, less climbing on ladders. Next. And in this area, the local nurseries almost always carry from a few nurseries, and there's a couple of reasons for that. But the rootstocks that we can buy pretty much from the Bay Area to the foothills up to Chico and down to about Fresno, a little further north of Fresno. The first one is Trifoliate, and one of the enhancements for it is it's cold hardy more than other rootstocks, and then it's also rot and nematode resistant. The difference is the C35, it's less cold hardy, but you get your fruit sooner. So for a trifoliate rootstock, you might not see a good crop on your tree for 4 to 5 years. Whereas with a C35, you get it in 2 to 3 years. Next. So there's so many in the Rutaceae family to choose from. And I'm going to be talking throughout about a concept called cold tolerance. And cold tolerance is the number of hours at a specific degree of temperature that the plant can take and how many hours that it will be at that temperature. So these are listed from the most cold hardy to the least. So kumquat's the first one. Then there's the kumquat hybrids, which is generally speaking a kumquat hybridized with a mandarin. Then the mandarin family, the grapefruit, oranges, limes, and then lemons are the least cold tolerant. So which varieties of these are best suited for El Dorado County and the foothills? Starting again with the most cold hardy are the kumquats. Those are small fruits that are about 1 inch or so in diameter. They have that thin skin that's very sweet with the flesh that's tart inside. The fukushu and the nagami, they bloom from fall to spring. And they take temperatures down into the low 20s, like 22 degrees for a couple of hours. The Nordman is a seedless variety. So for some of you that like to take your kumquats and turn them into marmalade or jam, that kind of idea, you're going to be messing with a lot less seeds. The Mewa is mid-20s, so they're just a little less tolerant to the cold. And they again are from fall to spring. And one thing I also want to mention is when it says fall to spring, what I'm talking about is they'll first start to ripen in fall, and there'll be some that will be ripe right away. Others will come along. But then also the fruit hangs on the tree very, very well. So many times with apples or stone fruit, when the fruit is ripe, you have to pick it, and then you have to find a way to store it. Whereas the best way to store citrus is to just leave it hanging on the tree. That's your refrigerator or your basket. And when you need some, you just go out and pick it off. So these would stay on the tree very well into the spring. Next. So the kumquat hybrids. And the first one on there is the variegated calamadin. That's a lovely tree. For those of you that are also trying to incorporate vegetables and fruits into your landscape plan, it's a beautiful bushier tree with variegated white and green leaves. It produces fewer kumquat hybrid, but it does it sporadically throughout the year with the exception of a couple of months in the middle of the summer. It also is tolerant down to 22 degrees for a couple of hours. The lemonquat, question mark. Many of you may know of a citrus that you absolutely love, and you had it say you lived in Florida or you lived in Texas, or you tasted it when you were visiting somewhere in Asia. And there are many citrus that are not available in California for a variety of reasons. In the case of the lemonquat, it was developed by a hybridizer in Texas. And he was concerned that his lemonquat tree could change if it was exposed to trees in other states, that it would hybridize again and not be a lemonquat. So he made it specific for Texas, and plus he just really wanted it only available in Texas, and that's his prerogative since he developed it. This has been a problem with some diseases that we have in California because people want that fruit. And so they've taken cuttings and brought them to California so that they could get that variety. And we can't do that anymore. So I'll talk about that in the later slides. The last one is the Indio. It's a very nice size, shape fruit. It's probably twice as big as kumquats. We have a beautiful one in the Sherwood demonstration garden. It probably right now has about 80 of these on the tree. And again, it's cold tolerant to the mid-20s. Next. Tracy. So the next group are the mandarins. And the Owari Satsuma is the one that you see so much of in El Dorado County and Placer County. They're sold at many of our local stores and farmers markets. One of the reasons, because they're more cold tolerant than, say, the clementine and others. They grow from October through January. There's many of those farms up there right now on Gold Hill and up in Loomis that are selling right now with the ripe fruit, whether you go up there to get it or whether you box it and it's shipped to you. The clementine is the only citrus that requires cross-pollination. And that means you just need to have any other citrus in your yard or close by that is not a clementine. So clementines can cross-pollinate with a lemon. It'll cross-pollinate with other mandarins, like an Owari Satsuma. It is a nice one. The skin is a little bit thinner, but notice that the temperature range is up to 28 to 30 degrees for cold tolerance. And then the last is the gold nugget. It again is a delightful thin fruit mandarin, but again, the cold tolerance is higher. So many of the farmers in this area because of the work to try to protect during low temperature nights, have chosen to grow the Owari. Okay, next, Tracy. So limes, we're moving up into the 28 to 32 degree cold tolerance zone. Bearss is the first one and the one that's really recommended the most, because notice it's 28 degrees, whereas a key lime, which is very popular with many people, is 30 to 32 degrees. And it's 30 to 32 degrees at only an hour, whereas the Bearss can take 28 degrees for a couple of hours. It's thin, it's thicker. The fruit is tartar, whereas the key lime is sweeter. Those are kind of the differences between those two limes. All limes will eventually turn yellow. So you may have a Bearss lime, but by the time you're picking it, say in February or March, the lime will have turned yellow, but it still tastes like a lime. It doesn't taste like a lemon. And then there also is the Palestine Sweet that will always be yellow, but it is a lime. And again, it's available for harvesting in fall, and its cold tolerance is 30 degrees. Next. Grapefruit. And this includes the pomelos. So Oro Blanco and Chandler are the ones that are, and the Rio Red are the three that are the best for this particular area, growing area. They can take the cold more than the other ones can. They have a nice skin to them with a beautiful sweet flavor. And note that the Oro Blanco and Chandler ripen from December through March. And then if you wanted to extend your grapefruit season, you could have the Rio Red as a second, and then your season goes from December through June. They both are cold tolerant to 28 to 30 degrees. So they're a nice combination if you have space for two different grapefruits. Next. Oranges. And you'll note the pictures on the bottom. It starts with a mandarin, so that's the size of a mandarin. The next is the cara, and then the blood orange is slightly smaller, and then your usual Washington navel. The Washington navel is November through April. It holds very well on the tree. Moro bloodgood does not hold well on the tree. If it's ripe, it needs to be picked and eaten. It has a real off flavor if you're not getting it when it's ripe. And then the cara, that's that really kind of bright orange one there, the second one. And that's because of the lycopene that's in it. And again, it's December through March, 28 degrees cold tolerance. Next. And then last, the lemons. And you either love a Meyer lemon or you love a Eureka lemon. And most people, it's the Meyer. It has a thinner skin, slightly sweeter flavor to it. It starts ripening late fall through the spring. They're usually good until April. But it's 32 degrees cold tolerant. Whereas the Eureka has a thicker skin, has that little nub at the bottom of it. The skin isn't as smooth as the Meyer lemon. Same ripening time period, but it will take temperatures to 30 degrees. So it's a little more cold hardy. Okay, next. So what does a citrus tree need for it to be happy? Well, they need at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. They want to be in a wind-free area. They do not like fierce winds that blow and tear at their leaves and scar the fruit. So, for example, I have some lemons and mandarins planted about 6 to 8 feet from a fence. And that fence is to help protect them from winds that blow up through the canyon that is below my house, but they still get plenty of sunshine for at least that 6 to 8 hours after the sun's come up and over the fence. And then also, in almost all of our gardens, we have microclimates, whether you have a small lot or whether you have several acres. And it's important to know what those climates are, because you can find that in one area that's a low area in your yard, that citrus wouldn't do as well because the cold air sinks, and that they might do better on the east side where it's higher, or on the north side where it's higher. I know typically the west side of your property is a warmer side, whereas your east is cooler, and mine is actually the opposite. For some reason, there's kind of a wind tunnel that comes through the west side of my yard, and I could not plant citrus trees there. Next. So, as Farmer Fred used to say on the radio, know your area, everything is local. This was a picture that I took off of some weather site in about, I think it was 2014, when we last had some really cold temperatures. This was the morning lows, and this is primarily Cameron Park area. Shingle Springs there, note at that one spot was 20 degrees, and that's where you've got the Ponderosa Road, North Shingles Road taking off there. There's a auto repairs place there and a couple of other things. And it is a low spot, so the cold air has dropped down into there. Whereas you go up to Cameron Park, where the airport is, it's 31 degrees. Now, I always thought with the airport area being so exposed, that might be a colder area. And yet it's 11 degrees warmer there than it is in the Shingle Springs location. Probably there's some radiation off of the runways or something that helps to raise that temperature, but it is also a high area. Then up north of that, just slightly higher in Cameron Park, but there's a dip. So it's 29 degrees, 2 degrees difference. But again, if you're talking about a Eureka lemon versus a Meyer lemon, you need to know that, because you need to protect it sooner than you would if you live close to the airport. Down closer to Highway 50, working down the hill, 26 degrees, that's 5 degrees difference, and that's close to the library down there. So again, it's lower, kind of a sink for the cold air to flow down to. And then over off of Bass Lake Road, it's 29 degrees. So even though you can hear in the news that Cameron Park is going to get to a low of 28 degrees, or Placerville is going to get to a low of 28 degrees, you need to know your area. And that's readily available on a lot of the weather sites, where they have specific stations within an area to know what your temperatures are supposed to be for that area. Next. So another important part of citrus is they do not like to sit in wet soils. And many of our foothill areas here have clay soils. If you're down in Sacramento area, I saw some of you were, you've got those nice loam soils that do great with drainage. But we in the foothills have a lot of clay and rocks in our soil. So what you need to do to check for your drainage is to dig a hole 30 inches deep, fill it with water to the top to saturate the soil. Then the next day, come back out and refill the hole again to the top. Check back in 2 hours. And if the water has dropped 2 inches or more, then your drainage is adequate for citrus. Or if it's not, next. You plant in a raised bed or a container. So most of the people that I know that live somewhere up the hill here have raised beds, or they've put their citrus into containers. Notice the raised bed there, those blocks are those 8-inch construction concrete blocks. So those raised beds are approximately 16 inches high. You could even go one more block higher, or use the 10 and 10s for 20 inches high. and they're about 8 inches or 8 feet in diameter. You want to fill that or your pot with some well-drained soil. And one thing that many people think is they buy their 1 gallon citrus and they want to put it in a wine barrel because they know that it's going to get bigger. And that's not recommended. Citrus likes to feel their roots kind of comfy, cozy, close to each other. And so the recommendation is if you have a 1 gallon pot that you planted into a 5 gallon pot or maybe a 10 gallon, but you don't go up to these huge wine barrels. And also on that pot, please make sure that it's a pot that has drainage holes. Some of them don't. So next. Citrus are different than all the other usual recommendations that we have. Usually we say the best time to plant of the year is in the fall because it has the plants have a chance to get established, and then when spring comes, they really blossom and they grow and grow and grow even more. With citrus, because of this cold tolerance idea and freezing, it's recommended in this area to only plant in the spring, and it can be early spring, it can be March. And you want to plant the root ball high and only use native soil in backfilling into the hole that you've created. You can pick the rocks out, but use the native soil, because otherwise you're planting, if you used some nice loam to plant in this hole in the ground, it would become like a pot and the roots would just go round and round, not wanting to go out into that clay soil. Notice to plant it. I've used this picture because this picture shows the plant that's planted really too low. Notice where the red arrow is pointing at the level, and that needs to be about 2 inches higher where the actual sleeve is. And that's because when you plant, a plant always settles some, and usually it settles about 1 inch. And then you want the root ball high, even if your first small roots are showing, because those roots will not get rot like if they're planted level with the ground. So don't allow the mulch on the trunk. Build yourself a basin so you've got your raised mound where your plant is. Then it drops down, and then you can make the donut around it to help to hold the water in as you're filling it, soaking it. If you put drip on it, put the drip out in that drip zone, not up next to the trunk. And then water thoroughly. Generally speaking, depending upon your soil temperatures and the time of the year, what the weather is doing, you water bi-weekly. There was a February a couple of years back where our temperatures were 86 degrees almost consistently. It was the dry, warm February. And at that time, probably the trees would have needed 3 waters a week, again, depending upon the soil. Next. So pruning of your tree. There's 2 terms that we usually use for pruning of trees, and that's heading cuts and thinning cuts. Heading cuts are what help to shape your tree the most. So you take your first year tree and you trim back, you head back some of the limbs so that it encourages other nodes to grow out side branches to fill in. And then a year later, you again do the same thing. And after several years, 6 to 8 years, you have a nice formed tree that has lots of lateral branches. Thinning cuts are when you need to reshape a tree because, say, one side of the tree is more predominant and needs some of the heavier, bigger woods taken out from the other side, or you have a dead branch that you need to have removed. So that's where you look for the collar, where the branch meets the trunk of the tree, and you want to make sure that you're about 1/4 inch away from that to 1/2 inch. You're then going to make an angled cut, and you start from the bottom. so that when you cut from the bottom and then you come back and cut from the top, as you cut from the top and the weight of the limb starts to weigh down and pull down, that you don't end up stripping bark from underneath down into the tree, so that the scab, the wound, doesn't heal as nicely. Also, it used to be that you were supposed to put tar or some kind of a substance on that wound so that it healed. Well, it found that that helped to keep water in, cause more problems, possibly even pest problems. So trees are very good at healing themselves without any application of anything put on after you cut the limb off, even for large cuts. Next. And this again is showing what it would kind of look like with some heading cuts, some thinning cuts. One thing it's talking about, I'll have a better picture of in a minute, about removing water sprouts. Those are the limbs branches that grow straight up, and they just grow way faster and bigger, and usually they're more thorny than the other branches. And they take a lot of energy away from the tree. So you want to remove those right down to the branch. Don't worry about the collar, just get rid of them as soon as you can. There's also suckers that will grow out from the rootstock. You want to get rid of those because you're not wanting the fruit from the sucker. You want the fruit that's the variety that you want. And then of course you're thinning and heading cuts. And for citrus, the spring shoots that come off of the woods that bared previously are the ones that are most productive. So when you're removing your fruit, you want to know which branches are the most productive branches, and then allow the spring branches that come off of those branches to flourish, because that's where your best crop is going to occur the next year. Next. So here's an example of suckers. Notice there's the back of the dog's leg, kind of the crook where the red arrow is, and all of those branches below that are the suckers that need to be removed quickly. You can cut them, you could even break them off at the trunk to get rid of them. And then next. That's an example of a sucker. I wish that I had pulled the leaves away for when I took the pictures so that you could see where it attached there at that branch. The arrow is pointing to where it comes from, but it just goes straight up. Its color is, the leaves are more yellow because it's growing so fast. And then the next shows, Tracy, shows what it looked like after it was trimmed. So that red arrow is pointing kind of to the whitish dot where the branch was trimmed off. Again, those suckers and water sprouts deplete the tree from its energy. And then a lovely way to do citrus is espalier. It makes it easier to cover it during the cold weather and to put lights on. There's all sorts of forms. This is a very attractive vase form that's on a block wall. That block wall is going to radiate a lot of heat, so that during the wintertime, that tree might not need any lights put on it. And then there's the more traditional, just horizontal espalier that goes to the sides. Next. And people just worry a lot about blossoms, because sometimes citrus will set so many blossoms and it's just like, oh my gosh, how do I possibly thin all that like I would on my apple or my peach tree? You don't have to. Citrus are self-thinning. Whatever the tree can bear, it will bear, and whatever it can't, it will drop. Even if there's clusters, let's say there's 4 or 5 lemons all in one spot, the tree can take it. It's just a great limb for that pollination to occur. Next. Fertilizer. I'm going to talk some about fertilizer because there's also a lot of changes in fertilizing citrus. It used to say, in fact, all the bags still say, fertilize 3 times a year. That's not recommended today, and I'll explain those reasons. But you need to understand fertilizers. There's complete fertilizers that have trace minerals, and a complete fertilizer has nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it, whereas an incomplete would say just have nitrogen. And lemons or citrus are heavy nitrogen feeders, so there may be a time when you want to only be buying a nitrogen product to fertilize your citrus with. Most of the time, what people will buy is a citrus avocado food kind of blend. And you can also use water soluble instead of dry. Note on all of these, it's hard for me to see on my screen the way it is, but one of them is a 742. So that's a 7 nitrogen, 4 phosphorus to 2 potassium. The other one is a, thank you. The other one is a 646. So depending upon what you're seeing for your needs and what your soil testing has shown would determine which one of those products would be better used for your purpose. In general, container plants are going to want a more complete food because as you water, more of the minerals and elements are leached out of those soils. So in general, they need a complete fertilizer. Next. I have a question that I see out of the corner of my eye just real quickly. Biweekly is twice a week is what the watering would be, is twice weekly, twice within the week, or 3 times within the week. This is an example of a citrus that was removed from a grove. And so it's a fully mature citrus, had some kind of problem and they pulled it out. But the roots of citrus are shallow when they're in the ground. And that's why you want to make sure as you're feeding and watering that you're getting out to the drip line. You're not wanting to just put a sprinkler right at the base of the tree like lots of gardeners tend to do. You want to make sure that you're getting out because those thicker branches are not what's absorbing. All the little thin roots that are attached to them are the ones that are feeding and sucking in the water. Next. So fertilizer application. How often do I do it? Well, right now, the recommendation is if you're not seeing any signs or your soil testing is saying that there isn't any difficulties with the nutrients in your soil, only fertilize in late August to mid-September to meet the needs of your tree. And there'll be reasons with pests and diseases later on that will help to explain this. We want to decrease the amount of flush with our citrus trees. The mature leaves are quite tough and more resistant to any pests and diseases. So fertilizing once a year unless testing determines minerals are needed. And please follow all the directions on the fertilizer, but again, do not follow the directions to do it 3 times a year or with the foliars, spray it every week type of an idea. Next. Container citrus. Again, the best for them is slow release, foliar spray. I haven't seen any foliar sprays lately, but I've seen quite a few different products that are slow release. And they will need more frequent applications. So the recommended times are May, July, and August. Consistent, even water, never soggy. Now, with a container citrus, you can fill up that basin in the container and have the water come up on the tree trunk. Don't worry about that because it's going to drain out of there rather quickly. Whereas when I was talking about trees planted in the ground, you're not wanting the water to get up on the trunk of the tree because it's not going to flow out as quickly, and you're going to end up with rot on the trunk of your tree. Next. Yellow leaves. This is one of the most frequent questions that we get in the Master Gardener office and in our emails. I have yellow leaves. What's wrong with my tree? Is it dying? What do I do about my yellow leaves? Well, the problem is there's a lot of different looks to yellow leaves, and we need to know what each one is showing us is wrong with that leaf. So you'll notice that we've got several different samples here, and we've got even a plant where the leaves are curled up. And boy, you know, that one says, water me, right? That's what it says. So the first one, next. Nitrogen deficiency. So they're heavy nitrogen feeders. Notice if your citrus is low in nitrogen, the veins are yellow. So the veins are the areas there in the center of the leaf and then arching out, branching out on either side. The actual leaf is still pretty green, but the veins are yellow. Nitrogen deficient, yellow veins. Next. Iron deficiency, green veins with the yellow leaf. That's an iron deficiency, like we'll see in gardenias and azaleas and those types of plants. Green vein, iron. Then potassium and magnesium trace elements, they have kind of a funny, whiter mottly with greens staying inside on the leaf. Those are trace element deficiencies. And then last but not least, the most common one is overwatering. That curled up yellow-leafed plant citrus is being overwatered. In fact, if you can see, the base of the trunk is actually planted too low as well. So it's probably going to die in a short period of time. They also probably should have put it in more soil, raised it up, because that is really quite a bit of a basin there for that to be watered in. And then the most typical yellow leaf that we see is the one on the right. And that's where you see the brown and the curling and it's all yellow and oh my gosh, it's not getting enough water. No, it's being overwatered. So cold tolerance. And here is a tree in an orchard, and the farmers spray when cold temperatures are predicted, they'll spray their orchards with water so that the water freezes, because ice and snow are insulators. So if you live in an area in the foothills here and it snows, please do not remove the snow from your tree. Leave the snow on your tree. Yes, the outside leaves will suffer some, but that snow is going to insulate, because as the storm front moves on, generally speaking, colder temperatures follow it, and that snow is going to protect the center of the tree and any fruit that's still on it. Next. So again, cold tolerance is based on the number of hours at that temperature. So let's take the Meyer lemon. It was 32 degrees. So if it's predicted to be at 32 degrees for 2 hours or more, then it needs to be protected. Things need to be done to help it to survive. So if it's a container plant, you could move that, put it on wheels and move it close to your house, because your house will radiate heat from it. You want to remove any of the ripe fruit that's on the tree. And then you want to put on some frost blankets. This was in 2014 as I was driving up Salmon Falls, and I felt sorry because from the low temperatures that we'd had, they were down in 24, 25 degree temperature. Those frost blankets that they had over them that you can buy at the nursery stores and the big box stores are a grade 10. So they're providing about 2 degrees of warmth to that tree. And then also these were planted far enough away from a home that I was sure that there wasn't any electricity to them to help warm them with lights. So again, knowing what frost blankets to get is important as well. Next. So another type of frost blanket are row covers or a cloth. You don't want to use plastic. You want to support the row cover off of the tree. You want it to be several inches away from it. So they've got some PVC pipes here. And then you want to make sure that the row cover goes down to the ground. She's putting some bricks around to help hold it down. So if there's winds, the winds won't allow the cold air to seep in. And definitely the lollipop style of surrounding the tree is not how to do it. Now they did do one thing great in this photo. One of the things you want to do is you want to water the citrus tree the day before the expected event, because the water at night is going to radiate warmth up into the tree branches. And if you have the mulch there, it can't do that radiation. So you want to pull the mulch away, leave it just the bare ground so that the radiation can come up. But again, that row cover needs to go all the way down to the ground. It'll protect the trunk as well as allow that radiation to occur. And then of course, those branches are being touched by the row cover, so they're going to die. Next. These are our citrus that we need to cover at the demo garden. There's a grapefruit, an Oro Blanco grapefruit under one and a Bearss lime under the other one. Notice we've got a doorway there to the left side where we can walk in and see the tree, harvest the crop, do whatever we need to in there. We've got some blocks that are being put around there to help hold it down. The citrus that's in front of there is a mandarin, and we don't cover it at this time because we haven't been having temperatures getting down into the mid-20s. So it's doing just fine. To the left of the leftmost tent is that Indio kumquat hybrid, and it too is not tented. So those are some examples. I think those were some kind of a carport cover that one of the master gardeners had found and cut into two sections so that one went over one tree and the other one went over the other tree. And then the row cover crop on it, row cover on it. Next. Now, when I teach this class in person, everybody wants to know what the row cover actually looks like. And I usually have a sample of it to pass around. This is the one that I have on those trees up there. You can buy other companies besides Agribon. But can you see how it looks like there's tiny little holes? It looks almost like it's kind of a melded fabric. And again, talking about grades, there's grade 10, which is what you can buy at the local nurseries and the big box stores. And that gives you just 2 degrees of protection. If you get a grade 30, it gives you 6 degrees of additional frost protection. So for example, if it was that Meyer lemon that needed it for 32 degrees, it could get down to 24 degrees, where's my math? 26 degrees, and still be okay. And it allows 70% light transmission. So you can leave it on the tree all the time. You don't have to run out because it's going to be a cold day, get the tree covered. Oh my gosh, what a hassle. And then the next day run out and take it back off again. It can just stay on there. Again, a grade 50 gives you 8 degrees of frost protection and allows 50% of light transmittance. So the ones that are at the demo garden are a grade 50 because 50% light in the winter when most of our days are not cloud covered or foggy or any of those kinds of things gives plenty of light through. Citrus are also self-fruiting with exception of that clementine. So you're not having to worry about letting your bees and your pollinators in to pollinate the fruit. The other reason that I like to use the 50 is it's less susceptible to damage from the winds. So the 30 is thinner, it's easier torn by winds, and the 50 is stronger. Next. And then again, make sure that your plant is watered deeply. I just had to have this one because notice where their water is shooting from. It's right next to the trunk. And that is not where you want your water to be coming to. At least it's pointed away from the trunk, but still, that's not a best situation for watering that citrus tree. Another protection that is needed for young trees, let's say under 5 years of age, is that their trunks need to be wrapped. It can be wrapped with this pipe foam, which is very easy. It's already cut. You just slip it around, tape it on there, and it's good to go. You could use cardboard. You could use newspapers, whatever it is that is insulating. I've seen some that had some kind of a pipe that they had stuffed with material, a cottony down kind of a material. So wrap the tree trunks if they're young. Next. And then last but not least, using lights to also help heat. Make sure that they're the old Christmas kinds of lights, the energy inefficient C7s, the smaller ones, the C9s are larger, not LED. Several years ago, I saw one of the big box stores selling LED lights to help protect your crops from the sensitive cold that was supposed to be coming. And a lady was talking to her husband on the phone and said, "Oh, I've got to get these, dear." And I said, "Please don't." They will not do anything for your tree. Today, in the last year or so, I've seen that they are not advertising those, and they're actually bringing in the inefficient C9 lights to be sold. And then the next, if you don't want to use pretty Christmas lights, is to use 100-watt heat lamp, exterior rated, mounted it from the ground because again, the cold temperatures fall to the ground, so you want the heat to start from the ground going up. Next. Oh, and notice on that picture, they had plastic. Do not use plastic around the tree to protect it. Only a cloth. So these are examples from the 2014-15 freeze. The ones on the left are from the demo garden. The ones on the right are from my garden. There was a difference of 300-foot elevation. In general, the other conditions were pretty similar. And the one was a 2-year-old Owari Satsuma, and it had some damage to the leaves. Didn't have any light because we had no electricity there at the time, and it wasn't covered. But it survived. It did okay. Whereas the 4-year-old espaliered one, which is thinner, so it's a little more sensitive to temperatures, did have the cover and did have the lights for 2 nights. And then the next slide. There's the Meyer lemon, the same cold event, 2 years old with row cover and no lights. It died. It did not survive. And then the Eureka lemon, 3 years old with row cover and lights. Notice the row cover was touching some of those leaves, and so that's why those leaves died. But the areas where the row cover didn't touch it, it was fine. Next. All the different diseases and pests of citrus for this area and including some others outside of the area. So next. The citrus red scale. This has been one that's been in this area for many years. It's an armored body. It's not a soft scale. It covers all surfaces. It'll be on twigs, leaves, and the fruit. And you just take care of it by blasting with water, hand rubbing it, pick. If it's really severe, you can use a horticultural oil spray on it in the springtime, not in the summer. Next, citrus blast. We've been seeing a lot of that with our unusual cool storms that have been coming through in the spring. That's what causes it to happen. Looks a little bit like fire blight, but not as severe. The cool, wet weather causes the black lesions, and the leaves curl up and die. The entire twig may die, and you prune this out after the rainy period and pick up any of the debris on the ground that's been dropped. How do you prevent it? Don't have a flush of growth. So that's why, even though your fertilizers are saying, oh, fertilize in February, because we've been having many of these events happen, we're saying don't, because it affects the new flush of growth. It doesn't affect the old. And then fertilize, like we said, in the late summer, and then prune late summer and fall. We used to say on citrus, you could prune any time of the year. Never worry about it. Just citrus could take pruning anytime. Now we're saying, please try to wait for your pruning until late summer and fall. You might do a little bit other times, like if you had the dead branch or branches that were crossing and rubbing on each other. But otherwise, prune your major amount of pruning in the late summer to fall. Next. Whiteflies, thrips, and mites. We've been having a lot of whitefly problems in this area. Not so much thrips and no mites. But we call those the over problem. Generally speaking, it's because it's being over-fertilized and overwatered, and you're using pesticides which kill their natural predators. So using less of all those things will help decrease your problem with whiteflies, specifically thrips as well. And then mites are only usually a problem on lemon trees in the Bay Area. Again, they like that cool, moist air. Next. So we keep saying, plant the tree high, plant the tree high. Why? Because you don't want to get the Phytophthora root rot. This is a beautiful example on the left of what that black rotting trunk looks like because of too much water sitting on it for too long. And then the right picture is a lemon tree in a grove that is suffering from the root rot. So plant it high, keep that trunk dry. Next. Citrus leaf miner didn't used to be a problem here. It was down in Sacramento area. I know down in San Joaquin, they had some problems with it. It feeds on, again, that flush of the new foliage because the harder, older leaves, they can't chew through and mine. So, and foliar sprays are only effective for a couple of 2 to 3 weeks only. You would never want to use any kind of a systemic product, pesticide on a citrus because you're going to be eating that fruit. It's an edible crop. So again, what you do is you decrease the growth flush. You trim late summer and don't apply nitrogen unless it's needed, fertilizers. Real distinctive pattern on the leaf. It's easy to tell you've got a leaf miner. Next. I've added this one this year because we've been seeing a lot more citrus red mite in this area. It causes very little damage to the fruit. It causes the leaves to be stippled, looking kind of polka dot white green. It's not really a big problem. It has lots of predators. So again, if you're not using pesticides, the predators will get those mites. You hose off the plant occasionally to get the dust removed. They like a dusty environment. And prune also to make sure that you have enough air circulation because they don't like that, that open air feeling. And then horticultural oil in the spring if it's severe, if you're just seeing little red mites everywhere. And by a horticultural oil, I mean like a product like neem. Next. The brown marmorated stink bug. We thought several years ago, since it was so much of a problem down in Sacramento County, that we would have the brown marmorated stink bug in El Dorado County and even Placer County and Amador. They are wonderful at hitching a ride on cars, and the cars drive up our freeway and then they jump off and here they are. They are terrible at flying. What they do is they suck juice from the fruit and the leaves, and there's really no treatment for them at this time. Like I say, they were a terrible problem down in Sacramento. There was a gentleman, Chuck Ingalls, who was tracking their progress and where they were. And they love in the wintertime to get nice and warm by finding any little crevice to get into your home. And being a stink bug, they do stink. So there are other stink bugs that we have besides the brown marmorated. But the way to tell a brown marmorated is it has smooth shoulders instead of rough. It has bands on its legs and around its abdomen, the rear. And if you think that you have one, put it in a container or a plastic bag, report it to your master gardener office. And one thing that helps to decrease its coming to your property is to keep your property more weed free. They kind of like to be nesting and egg planting in weedy areas, but they eat anything. It's not just citrus. They love all sorts of vegetables and all sorts of fruit trees. So keep your eye out for the brown marmorated stink bug. Next. Now this is the one that is really causing problems in California, the Asian Citrus Psyllid. And it's not so much that it causes the problem, it's the bacteria that it harbors. So it's a very tiny insect. It's about 1/8 of an inch long. It has red eyes, and when you actually see one on a branch or a limb or a leaf, the tail is up at about a 45-degree angle. What you'll probably more likely see is this waxy deposit from the nymphs. It's kind of a whitish yellow, and it twirls and twirls around. By the way, ants love it. It is sticky and sweet, and so the ants do try to help harbor the Asian Citrus Psyllid. So what the problem is next. Is Hulongbing, which we'll start calling HLB, and greening disease. It started many years ago. It actually started in Asia. It has devastated the citrus crop in Florida. Many of the citrus farmers have been directed to planting other things. There's been a lot of research done on it because there is no cure. And we all love citrus, and we use citrus for so many things in our lives. We don't want to have all of our citrus gone. So one of the indicators that there's Hulongbing in your tree is that you have an irregular mottled leaf. It doesn't look like the one back there with the magnesium. It's irregularly mottled. The fruit, when you cut it open, is lopsided. And you'll notice that the fruit itself also never fully ripens. That's a lemon, and it's staying green on the bottom. Next. So why am I bringing this up for El Dorado County? There are zones that California has designated for where Asian Citrus Psyllid are located. And we are considered in Zone 7. And notice that all of these counties, Sacramento, Santa Clara, San Mateo, Alameda, Contra Costa, Marin, San Francisco, Solano, Placer, and Yolo counties have Asian Citrus Psyllid. We have not identified any Asian Citrus Psyllid in El Dorado County yet, but they are all around us. And the cold doesn't seem to bother them. So in the state of California, these are all the counties that have Asian Citrus Psyllid. It is very, very prevalent. It's everywhere in Mexico. And the reason that California got the Asian Citrus Psyllid was because someone in Anaheim, actually in Orange County, in the community of Anaheim, just really wanted to bring that citrus plant from another country via a cutting because they missed the citrus that they love to eat from that country. And so they brought it, smuggled it in on their luggage, spliced it, grafted it onto their citrus in their home. And within 5 years, that tree was dead. And she wondered why it had died and contacted probably Master Gardeners or the California Food and Drug, or California Department of Food and Ag. And they determined that she did definitely have Hulung Bing in her tree, and that's why it died. Next. So the quarantine areas for Hulung Bing, these areas in blue are areas where the bacteria has totally consumed and is located in the citrus in this area. And this, of course, used to be the major citrus growing area for California. All of those orange trees were Disneyland where Disneyland is today, and it used to be all the orange fields. I get an email from them approximately once a month. Things have slowed down a little bit now with COVID, but every single email says, this area has now got this amount. In fact, the bottom coordinates there, it's hard for me to see on this, down there closer to San Diego, is one that's new in the last 3 months. And it's already that big. So next. So to save the citrus in California, it's now a highly regulated commodity, because Hulung Bing only spreads 2 ways, either by the psyllids themselves that are flying to bring it, that are infected with the bacteria, or if you're taking cuttings and grafting those cuttings from some area to your citrus in your area. An excellent, if you're into budwood and grafting, Dan Wiley through the university has put together this site to help you to know where you can get safe wood, and also to talk about different issues to do with Asian Citrus Psyllid and the Hulung Bing. Another thing that they're doing in all areas that have Asian Citrus Psyllid, so even in the Bay Area, used to just be Central and Southern California, but they're now using these in Northern California, is using the wasp called Tamaxaria. It's released in areas, and it costs 50 cents per wasp. And with each release, you need thousands to be released at one time. It is effective at getting rid of the Asian citrus, knocking down their populations. But just like with the codling moth, the timing and the size of the Asian citrus population matters to whether they're effective in knocking it down. So they go through a lot of testing, and in fact, they've developed some traps to help them with that. So they have the PCR tests on leaf samples. It takes from 9 months to 2 years to find the right leaf to detect Hulung Bing. So let's say that you have a tree that has 2,000 leaves on it. You know, you could pick 10 leaves off and test all 10, and they all come up negative, and yet you could have Hulung Bing in your tree because you just didn't pick the right leaf. So one thing that they've developed is using dogs to sniff it out, and the dogs have a high rate of finding trees that are infected with Hulung Bing. The problem is a lot of homeowners in Southern California are not wanting to let the California department come in with their dogs to sniff to see whether they have hulangbing in their citrus trees. So if your neighbor has a tree that's infected and you have citrus that's not infected, chances are that Asian Citrus Psyllid is going to be flying to your tree and infecting your tree. So we're hoping and doing many measures to try to get the public to realize that it's important to allow their trees to be tested. Next. There's an example of the sticky trap. A gentleman, Dr. Leal, he works at UC Davis, found the pheromone that the Asian Citrus Psyllid are attracted to. And so he's now developed these sticky traps that are used mostly in ag areas, farms, but also are put into homeowners' trees. And then also they're learning to control for ants. And then please follow quarantines. No trees, wood, fruit. That's the grafting kinds of fruit, including nursery stock tags. You go to the nursery and you go, oh, I really like that citrus there. I want to take that tag with me because I want to remember that name. Don't. It might have the Asian Citrus Psyllid eggs on it. And then again, decrease the flush of growth where the eggs are deposited on that new tender leaves. If you suspect that you have ACP, please contact the CDFA, the California Department of Food and Ag, or the local master gardener office. And I'll have that information at the end of the presentation as well. It's a huge problem that everybody is working very hard to try to get under control. And we just don't want it to come up here into Northern California more than it already is. So a few more things on a light note. Bud mite. It's not a Buddleia hand of citrus. This is actually a situation where mites that predominantly live in the coastal areas infect the buds at the bud stage, and thus the fruit doesn't grow nice and round. It grows looking like this. And the next one, this is when you'll probably see frequently. It's navel orange split, and it's just the navel oranges get stressed from when we have these fluctuations of temperatures. We get really hot temperatures, and then we get cooler, moister days. And either the watering you're doing isn't able to keep up with it, or the temperature fluctuations just make it so that it's impossible for enough water to be taken up. It doesn't damage the fruit. It just is unattractive. They wouldn't want to sell it in a grocery store. And then the last, there's a new citrus that a lot of people are finding, and it's called a microclimates citrus. It's not a true citrus, but it's the Australian finger lime. It grows on a bush that you'll see there on the top left. And then the fruit themselves, the nice ones, get to be about the size, about 2/3 the size of your small finger. And they come in many different colors. They are red ones, peachy ones, green ones. And each one of those, instead of having wedges for a citrus taste, they have little, almost like caviar eggs that when you crunch them in your mouth, they have a burst of that citrus taste. And they taste delicious on fish and salads, different things that you would think of putting citrus on. So next, and here's some resources for you. The first one is the Master Gardener IPM for all things citrus. The second one is that California Department of Food and Ag, and it will continue to give you specifically information about the Asian Citrus Psyllid and the hulangbing. And then the Home and Orchard Guide, and then the telephone numbers for both our office and the Department of Food and Ag. And that's it. You can leave it back at that one for a while, Tracy, just in case people haven't had a chance to copy that information down. So looking at some of that, and somebody has some finger limes and must be enjoying using them. I picked an orange from our tree last week and it tasted sour. It may not have been ripe, or it may need some of the trace elements. Those are reasons why an orange or any of the citrus would be tasting sour. May needed more time on the tree. And moving on up. Oh, I remember somebody had asked about a loquat. Loquats are not citrus. So I know about loquats. If you had more information you were wanting to know about them, but they are not a part of the citrus family. Getting flooded with bordered bugs. I'm not sure what a bordered bug is.
Phyllis, I think she's referring to the bordered plant beetle, and I've never had them on citrus at my place, but I will pull up the UCIPM pest notes.
Okay, that sounds good.
That. Okay.
Good, yeah. Oh, I meant to mention the kaffir lime. It's even more having problems with cold tolerance. I know that because many people are using it in different cuisines that they're cooking with today. Its cold tolerance is 34 to 35 degrees. So I do know that people are growing the kaffir lime, but just realize you're going to need to be covering it and putting lights with it to help keep it warm through these cold times. Yeah, citrus are heavy nitrogen feeders versus don't fertilize much. It's kind of a quandary. I have not fertilized the citrus in my yard or up at the demo garden for a year now. They have produced plenty of fruit and the fruit has been sweet. So I've been holding off on fertilizing. But my soils are clay soils, so they do hold the nutrients better than soils that are more loamy and drain more readily. So it's kind of a debate, you know. If you're finding that you need to use nitrogen because your tree is one of the heavier feeders due to your soils and things, try to hold off to fertilize until at least May, because a lot of the insects that we have in the area that are attracted to that flush of growth show up earlier in the spring, late winter to early spring. And no, I'm not endorsing Agribond, but it is one of the available products. Meyer lemon for probably 3 years now that has stayed small, maybe 3 feet wide, but only 2 feet tall, which had probably 200 blooms in the spring, went to small pea-sized fruit, but only one grew into a lemon. It'd be interesting to know, Donna, how old that tree is. It may just not be ready. It may be too young still to be giving enough fruit. And that's why it drops the blossoms. Question from Kat: should I transplant a Meyer lemon tree if it's in a flood prone spot? Yes. Didn't realize it was flood prone until the last storm. Is the risk of transplanting greater than the risk of occasional flooding? The risk is greater from the flooding. And even though, if it's possible for you to remove it at this time and put it in a pot, that you can kind of baby and watch through the winter and protect, to then put it in another area in your garden in the spring. But I wouldn't try to dig it up at this time and plant it in the yard somewhere else at this time. I'd wait until spring to do that. But definitely, if it's in a flood prone spot, the sooner you get it out of that spot, the safer it's going to be for that tree. Lincoln, Placer County. My dwarf citrus trees planted 2.5 years ago have flowered the last 2 years, but no fruit. What can I get to fruit? Sue, one of the things you'd want to do is check to see what your soils are. I'm thinking in that area that the soils are rocky and clay. If it's in the ground, it's not going to be as happy. It's not going to want a fruit. So putting it in a raised bed or putting it in a pot will probably help it to do better. I'm assuming it was a small one. So at this point, it's probably about 4 years old. It might be 3.5 to 4 years old. So it's just not happy in where it's been planted. I would try putting it in a raised bed or in a pot. So we've got Sacramento, Camino, Amador, Stanislaus. And hopefully I helped the person with a question about the yellow leaves. Oh, somebody from San Luis Obispo County. There's a lot more varieties that can be grown in San Luis Obispo County and in Folsom, Sacramento areas, Bay Area. A site that is good to look at to get an idea of those areas is called Four Winds Nursery. Four, spell out the word four, F-O-U-R, Winds, W-I-N-D-S Nursery. They are one of the reputable growers of citrus, and they have to go through a great deal to ship to different nurseries, and they will ship directly to you as well, to find out what citrus is suited for your county or for your area. Which brought up, because of all these areas, all these counties where there are the quarantines for the Asian Citrus Psyllid, you're not allowed to buy a citrus plant from the county. Let's say, okay, I'm going to use Green Acres down in Folsom. If I, living in El Dorado County, want to buy a citrus tree, I can't go to Green Acres and purchase a citrus tree and then bring it into El Dorado County. I have seen Green Acres ask their customers, where will it be planted? And hopefully they've been honest, because it's illegal at this point to transfer out of a county a citrus tree. And that's why right now we don't really have a nursery in El Dorado County. Well, we have one, maybe two, that we can buy from. So some in this county, the best way to do it is to buy directly from a grower that's certified to ship to El Dorado County. And I think that answers those questions. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Phyllis, there's a few other questions. Any issue putting tanglefoot sticky stuff on the trunk to keep insects from climbing up?
No, that's a good method. No problem with tanglefoot. You can use the borax products. You can mix up a borax mixture with a little bit of sugar, but keeping ants off of all sorts of trees, whether they're citrus or apples, stone fruit, really helps to decrease the amount of pests that you have to deal with, from aphids to Asian Citrus Psyllids. So
There's another question from Linda. Should I repot my newly potted citrus, which are not sitting high in the container?
Yes, definitely. No problem doing it right now after this class.
And from Jen, I planted a mandarin 2 years ago and the fruit this year almost all dropped off. Is it just the first fruit issues?
Yes, it can be. Again, it would be interesting to know whether it's in the ground or whether it's in a raised bed or a pot. Because if it's in our area with these clay soils, citrus are just not happy.
Okay, then from Gina, if my 2-year-old tree has sunk into the ground, what should I do?
Dig it up and get it to where it's not sunk in the ground. Get it those 2 inches above.
Okay, then from Jen again, what is a loquat? What is a loquat if not a citrus? Is it a stone fruit?
No, you know, I'd have to look that up. I don't know what a loquat is. I know that my grandparents and my parents both grew them, and I don't know what a loquat is. I noticed there's somebody who is asking about scions. If you go to that Wiley site, it mentions where you can buy scions from. So a loquat does come from Asia. It's a large evergreen shrubber tree grown commercially for its orange fruit and for its leaves, which are used to make tea. It is in the Rutaceae family, but it is a genus is Irobotria. So it's in the Rutaceae family, but not a citrus.
Then from Deborah, how do I know when it's time to transplant my lemon tree from the pot to the ground?
It would be, I hope she's heard about the drainage issues and what kind of soil you have. The time to do it again is in the spring. If you have the adequate drainage and nutrients and things. I had a kumquat tree in a pot for 15 plus years, and it just continued to be kind of too big for where I could place it on my patio. So I put it in the ground after 15 years, and it was very successful.
And Dale had a question, how and when do you get your soil tested? But Tracy put
she put a link
in the lab.
Yeah.
Then Kelly said, I bought, I believe it's 2 citrus trees from Costco. Should I get rid of them or give to a friend in Folsom?
Yeah, Costco's supposed to be asking too. It'd be better to give them to a friend in Folsom. That's the issue that we're fighting. Again, there's so much more information about Asian Citrus Psyllid in the areas where it's really a problem, and they do a better job of screening people where they're going to grow them. I do know that not all of Placer County has a problem with Asian Citrus Psyllid. It's just up in the Lincoln area that they've had Asian Citrus Psyllid problems. Same with Yolo County. Davis isn't a problem area, but there's some other areas, I think further north and west from there where they're having a problem. I don't remember where Asian citrus was identified in Sacramento County, but where there's more knowledge about it, the stores that are selling are doing a better job of screening. So.
And Gina had another question about the Meyer. Her Meyer tree hasn't produced any lemons. Is it too young? Could you go over that again? The age, between the Meyer,
yeah,
and the Eureka.
Oh, any of the trees, any of the citrus trees don't want to produce until they're at least produce well until they're at least 3 to 5 years old. And usually when you get one from a nursery, they're 1.5 to 2 years old. So then if you've had it for another 2 years, then that would make it 4 to 4.5 years old. And that's from a reputable nursery, not necessarily one of the big box stores. Oh, I know. One of the things I was going to mention is if you go to a reputable nursery, they will be able to tell you what the rootstock is. So whether it's that rootstock that's the C35, where the production is sooner, or whether your rootstock is trifoliate. And if for some reason or other you run into somebody that can't tell you that information, you can go to the manager and ask them to call their supplier, whether it's Monrovia or Four Winds or whoever it is that they're getting their citrus from.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. You said to raise the tree above the ground level now. If it's low, does it matter the age of the tree? I've had it planted in a terracotta pot for 3 years now.
If you're raising it in that terracotta pot for 3 and it's been in there for 3 years, you can do that right now if you're still keeping it in the terracotta pot. If you're planning on putting it in the ground, don't put it in the ground now. Wait until spring to put it in the ground.
Okay, we have one last question. What time of year should you prune your Meyer lemon branches?
Most of the pruning needs to be done late August, September, because again, when you prune, you'll get that flush of growth. So any of the citrus most of the pruning should be done late summer, early September, or late August, early September. If you see a problem, like you've got some crossing branches or a dead branch or something like that, it's fine to prune it at any time of the year. But the major pruning to air it out, to give it its shape, to do the thinning cuts and the heading cuts should be done late summer, September.
Okay, we'll go with one last question. Where should we buy citrus in our county?
There's I hate to mention nurseries because we have so few, and I'm supposed to at least mention 3. So there is El Dorado Nursery off of Duroc Road. There's buying it direct from Four Winds. And I know there's another nursery somewhere in El Dorado County. I just can't think of.
There's 2 others, Phyllis. One is called the Meadow. It's in Placerville. And then in Garden Valley, the Golden Gecko. So there's at least 2 more, and you would have to call them and ask if they have citrus.
Yeah, and some of those, just like one of the nurseries that we no longer have, if they don't have it, they will get it for you.
Wonderful. I'm glad you asked that question because I think sometimes it can seem like it's hard to find, and we all want to grow citrus if we can. So great question and a great place to end. I just want to say thank you to Phyllis. What a wonderful, informative presentation, notwithstanding some technical issues at the beginning. So thank you for being such a wonderful presenter, Phyllis.
Thank you. And hopefully that will never happen again.
Well, next time we'll do this in person, I sure hope. I look forward to that.
Yeah.
We'll follow up, folks, with an email so that you have access to the slides. And then we will post the video recording, probably not until after Thanksgiving, onto our public website. So you can go back and review that. Until then, have a wonderful holiday week. And I'm grateful you spent this morning with us. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care.
Yes, thank you so much.
And Phyllis, if you don't mind, just hang out for one moment.
Okay.
After our guests leave, we'll check in.